So could you tell me your name, first of all, your full name?
My name is Mindu Hornick, and I am a survivor of a ghetto, then Auschwitz Concentration Camp, and slave labor camp in northern Germany, about 15 kilometers outside Hamburg. People say, how did you survive? And I would always say, sheer luck and 100 miracles. Because if you were fortunate enough to be taken out of Auschwitz to an ammunition factory or some kind of work, you had a better chance of survival. There wasn't the typhoid and dysentery and all the diseases that were going on in Auschwitz. So I was lucky. After nearly 6 months, we were selected with a transport of 5 women, myself and I had a sister with me. And we were transported to Liberstadt, which was an ammunition factory about 15 kilometers outside Bremen. Outside Hamburg, sorry. It was between Bremen and Hamburg. I mean, they had many of those slave labor camps from there.
And when you were talking about the ghettos before...
The what?
The ghettos.
Oh, yes.
What happened in that process? So people were moved into ghettos?
In the ghetto, well, we were taken to Košice. You know what a ghetto is. They sectioned off part of a city. And I remember we were in Košice, which was the capital of Slovakia. By the way, I was born in Czechoslovakia. We were on a hayloft. It was a very rural part of the city that they sort of kept us. We were there about 2 months, and then we were taken, ordered to go to the ghetto center, loaded onto lorries. There wasn't a luxury of coaches, it was lorries, carts. And we were taken to railway siding and started loading us up, mothers and children. I will go back on my story a little bit and tell you that this particular transport consisted purely of mothers and children and perhaps 1 or 2 grandmothers that happened to be living with the family. The men were already, my father was already taken away 2 years earlier to the so-called army. But these men had no uniform. They were just an armband with a Star of David. They wore their own clothes and went ahead of the German armadas to do their menial task, dig trenches, load lorries, and possibly clear mines. Anyway, our father came home once, and sadly, we never saw him again. So we were a family without my father. So the mothers and children were left in the home, but it was very, very difficult. They take my father's business away. And funnily enough, and not a lot of people know that, our part of Slovakia, which was by the Carpathian Mountains, was divided. And they given our part of Slovakia to the Hungarians, to Horthy Miklós, because it was Austro-Hungary before the First World War. But because the Hungarians collaborated with the Germans, they gave them back that part of Austria. So our little Jewish community was cleared out, again put onto lorries and carts and taken to Galicia, Treblinka, where those people, I don't know if you know the story, that's before the sophisticated gas chambers in crematoria were built. They would dig their trenches and be shot into them. about 8 or 9 families were left in our little community, which was very frightening. We lost all our neighbors and friends and some relatives. In fact, my grandparents, my father's parents, because the others lived in Prague, an actual Czech land. Anyway, so after a couple of years, Himmler decided he doesn't want any more Jews in Slovakia. So that's when we were ordered again to the town centre and taken to this. So I'm going back. But anyway, you will sort it out. The town centre put on to lorries, then taken to this ghetto in Košice. Anyway, after some weeks from the ghetto, we were again ordered to the town, to the centre of the ghetto, and taken onto lorries to railway siding. And there was a whole train of cattle trucks. And that particular transport consisted of mainly mothers and children from Slovakia and a few old grandmothers. And they started loading up these trucks. They pushed in and in. There must have been 70 or 80 of us in that carriage, and then put 2 buckets down. One was for water and one for sanitation. And we travelled for 3 days and 3 nights, not knowing our destination, as we never knew where we were going. And after 3 days, we heard some terrible clanging going on the chains, because all these carriages were chained and locked. And suddenly the gates opened. And the sight that greeted us was beyond belief. There were these hordes of people going past, SS men with guns on their shoulders. And there was always blaring loudspeakers and vicious Alsatians. Everybody had one of these dogs on their side. And as the gates opened, a Polish capo, these men with the striped clothes in their heads, they were called capos. And I mean, the Germans didn't do the work. They only gave orders. All the work was done with the inmates. He came into our wagon, and we happened to sit in the corner by this gate. And he said to my mother in Yiddish, that is a language that the Jewish community spoke. Have you heard the word Yiddish?
Yes.
Yeah. You have. And he said to her in Yiddish, Polish Yiddish, so he must have been a Polish man, and they were long-standing capo, a Holocaust captives. And he said to my mother, which are your children, in Yiddish? And she looked at him, she said, well, these are my 2 little boys and these are my 2 girls. And he looked again at her, and he said, I tell you what, set the girls ahead. You will see them later. And because he was so persuasive and so assuring that she would see us later, she said, well, we better do as this man says, because what we saw out there was very, very frightening. So as he was helping us down, we weren't terribly tall, down those carriages. I was 13, by the way, my sister was 15. He said to us, you say you're 17, and to my sister, you say you're 19, and du bist eine Schneiderin means you are a seamstress. You useful for some kind of work.
You had to bring a skill.
Oh, absolutely. You have to bring a skill with you. So we joined this enormous trail of people, and we looked back, and my mother wore a sort of a spotted scarf. So we looked back and saw my mother. She was quite a tall lady, and we waved to her, and that's the last time we saw her. Didn't see our little brothers because the people obstructed them. But once we got to the main gate, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free, we realized there was a selection, that mothers and children to the left, the older people went to the right for some reason, and some were being guided through the gate. In front of us, there was a lady with several siblings and a girl about our age. Well, she started screaming that because her mother and the children were taken to the left. So the guard who was standing by took the bat off his gun. You want to go with your mother? Go with your mother. It didn't make any difference. Another one for the gas chambers. We were guided through the main gate. And the sight that greeted us beyond this gate will stay with me for the rest of my life. There were watchtowers over us with machine guns pointing at us. And along the wall, there were trolleys with bodies, just skin and bone, dead bodies hanging down. And these emaciated couples wandering around aimlessly. We really thought we had entered hell. And there was this terrible grey ash falling down. We didn't know what it was. Of course, it was the burning crematorium. Anyway, we were ordered to go into, they called a raya. We hadn't got a clue what they meant. But they were always obsessed. People had to send 5 across. And when they collected a group enough, then you wouldn't be marched off. So after a while, we were taken off to a big shed and told to pack our clothes very neatly or a special hanger so that we would be able to know where to find them when we come back. And we were taken to the shower rooms. We hadn't got a clue at the time that some of those shower rooms weren't what they're supposed to be. But we were showered. We were obviously a different group of people. And when we came out, our clothes and everything had gone. They just threw us a garment, but no underwear. And then when we came out of the shower, we all had to sit on chairs. We were taken to a barber shop, and there were men roughly cutting all our hair from everywhere. You can imagine for young girls in puberty, possibly even our mother didn't see us naked in those days, to think that we had to sit there. They needed everything to dehumanize you. I mean, the scale of dehumanization at every step was beyond any human imagination, I can tell you, any decent human imagination. Anyway, and afterwards we were taken to this other depot, thrown a garment. So if you were short like I was, I would have something that was to the floor, and if somebody was tall, they would have something to the knees. So there was a lot of exchanges going on. And after a while, we were marched to a block. They were called a block, and that block already held 1,000 women. But that night, they were all occupied. There were bunk beds, and there were about twice the size of this, and you said 8 people would sleep on there. But that night, there was no room for us. So we had to sit on the floor all night to be without any water or any sanitation, and nowhere to lie down after this uncomfortable journey of 3 days. At 4 o'clock in the morning, suddenly we heard this whistle shrieking, "Sail appel, sail appel." Everybody was running, so we ran as well. And you had to stand for these sail appels to be counted twice a day, and sometimes 2 to 4 hours, if the numbers didn't tally. I mean, we didn't mean anything to them, but yet the numbers were very, very precise. And in fact, I don't know whether you know that, but Auschwitz has got 95% of records of the people that have come in. Have you been to Auschwitz?
I haven't, no, but I have researched it a lot, yeah.
If you go, you will see there is the names alphabetically. They're all alphabetically. They used to be in, when I originally went, after 40 years, they were in books which got very tatty and so on. After 24 hours, my mother's older sister and my 2 cousins were in the next block, Block 16, and they heard that the transport have come in from Košice, and they came to find us. As I said to you, people said, "How did you survive?" And that was a stroke of luck. She took care of us, because really we were very unsophisticated young people. We were in a sort of Carpathian village, brought up. We didn't have mobiles. I mean, those didn't exist, or any kind of communication. And luckily, she managed to exchange us with another couple that wanted to be in Block 14. And she took care of us right through. I always say most people, survivors, survived in pairs. People lived for each other, and there was my aunt and the cousins for us, which was, otherwise we couldn't have survived. Anyway, we were chosen, and I think it must have been some of the influence. As I said to you before, the Germans didn't do any of the work. The ladies who made sure that these blocks were kept tidy and clean and so on, were called blockältestes. One of these blockältestes in my aunt's block was a daughter of a friend of hers, also from her town. And she managed to, I think it was through her influence, we were taken to work in Canada. It was called Canada because of the wealth of possessions that was confiscated from people arriving at Auschwitz. And we had to sit and tear open the linings of coats and jackets. People would have hidden, such as wedding rings and watches and diamonds, whatever, in case they survived, they should have something to fall back on. And there were boxes there, and the soldiers standing near us, schnell, schnell. The minute the boxes were full, it didn't take long for them to fill up. They would take them away. And so after 6 months, I think it was the maximum, possibly you could survive on 200 calories a day. Was the diet. So our food was 1 soup a day, which was made out of turnips. And it was a slimy soup. It also contained some kind of chemical, bromide. A, to dull our senses, and secondly, to stop all women's bodily functions, you know, the monthly cycles. Because we had been given a dress, but no underwear, and a pair of wooden clogs. That's all we had. And at night, we were given a piece of a small slice of bread, which also contained some of it was sawdust in the flour, and that was our diet. So really, if you were taken out of Auschwitz, you had a chance of survival, because also in these sailor pells, I don't know whether you heard of Dr. Mengele, who did all the
experiments.
Experimental operations on people, and he was particularly obsessed with twins. We would often have Dr. Mengele walking along and immaculately dressed, they always were, with shiny boots and buttons, carrying a pair of white leather gloves. And when he, as you were standing in these rows of 5 across, when he waved one of these gloves at you, you had to step out of line. We would never see these people again. So possibly there were selections for the crematoria, they didn't look well, or for some experimental operation. Mm-hmm. So after some months, my aunt came to us and said, you're going to be between me and the girls. They're going to select people for a labor camp out of Auschwitz. So we went along, and at any time we had to be stripped naked, and they were looking at our muscles. Can you imagine it? What muscles we had after the starvation of nearly 6 months. Anyway, we were selected with 500 women to a slave labor camp, and we were taken to Canada, and we were given a dress and a coat and shoes. So we were being hopeful, if they're giving us all this, that we would survive. That they had one fetish. It was 48 hours, I think, the time limit before we were going. If you had this white sleeve, and this was navy and white, one of my sleeves would have to go onto your coat, and your sleeve would go onto my coat. I mean, they were just crazy.
Yeah.
Absolute crazy, yeah. So there were plenty of seamstresses, not like my sister and I, who weren't, with schoolgirls. And they got us ready, and we went to, we knew from our block elders that it is a labor camp, ammunition. We got to Liberstadt, and when we got out of the coach, we thought, if nothing will survive us, it's this wonderful air. This factory was in a wood and underground, and the accommodation was a prisoner of war camp, a Russian, I think, the Russian soldiers from the First World War, and there were about 18 to a cabin. We had camp beds, but the camp beds had straw, and we had a blanket, and we could wash, although stone cold water, but we could get washed. And we were taken to this factory. We were making bombs and grenades. So the tall girls were selected to pour in the hot gun solution without any face or body protection. So some of the girls had perforated lungs. Some of them had gone blind from the acidity, and us, we were on a different department, but the gas of this gunpowder went all in the factory. All our hair turned red. Anyway, when we completed a consignment, we had to physically lift these heavy bombs and grenades and load them onto lorries and physically pull these lorries to a railway siding and load them up onto the lorries. And if there wasn't a train there, there was nearby what they call it, a bunker, and we would have to take them up the stairs, put them in the bunker, and then, of course, the next day, whenever the train was there, load them on again. And that bunker is still there, because in 2018, I was invited to Hamburg for a very special commemoration, and I went along. Where was I?
You went to the bunker?
Yeah, they showed us the various places, the factory underground. That was destroyed. But the accommodation, the huts were still there. Also, it was all sectioned off, so we couldn't go in. On this trip, and I knew she was going to be there because, again, she was a friend, and she remembered so many more things that I didn't remember. We confirmed it with each other. We were practically a year at this ammunition factory. But at lunchtime in this ammunition factory, we were taken to the canteen and we were given one of these German soups that had some pulses. And I always tell to the children at school when I talk to them, you don't have to overeat. One good soup a day. And to this day, I maintain that this one soup that had some kind of nourishment in it kept us alive. You see, we worked for Luftwaffe. That's all they had to pay for us, one soup a day. And because we were in such a rural part of Germany, in northern Germany, the soups were a lot better than in Auschwitz. And I do think that survived us, I really do. So on May the 2nd, 1945, we noticed our guards were getting agitated. And they said to us, we are going on a transport instead of going back to work to the Mona factory. So we got up at 4 o'clock. Within an hour, we were on our way to the railway station. And again, as per usual, we didn't know our destination as to where we were going. And as we were traveling through Ettin in northern Germany, our train was bombed, killing our driver and some of our girls. Those that managed to break out started waving and indicating to the aircraft, because they were very low, that we were not fleeing Germans, that we were slave laborers. And I'm sure they went through because there were 80 out of these slave labor camps through Germany. They must have found more because they stopped. But a couple of hours later, a second train arrived, and they forced us to board it. We were very shaken and very frightened, but Himmler's orders still were coming into them. Within an hour, the British Typhoon fighters bombed our train again, mistook our identity again, thinking they were fleeing Germans. I looked round in the carriage. The roof had gone, and there were dead bodies all around me. And my sister was holding my hand very tightly and dragging me out and feeling, we were all full of dust, feeling if I was still alive. Anyway, after an hour or two, they were constantly getting messages. Himmler said, we want you to continue to Lübeck. So they forced us to form a line and start walking in the direction of Lübeck. There were no more trains available. And when we got to a small town called, a small harbour town called Lübeck, we were exhausted, we were shocked, and we had a lot of wounded and sick girls still from the factory with their lungs and so on. They made us sit on the embankment facing this small harbour. They tried to get us into those carriages with the excuse that they were going to hand us over to the Red Cross. But by that time, we refused to move off the hill. We somehow knew there were houses sort of on the front facing this harbour that I don't think they would shoot us. They just wanted to get us together, but they were constantly carrying out Himmler's orders because he was determined that all the slave labour camps should be destroyed and the slave labourers in it. And the order was, while we were in the direction of Lübeck, there were 3 boats in Lübeck harbour, and they collected already 10,000 slave labourers. And they wanted to get them all into those boats, and that the Germans would blow up the boats and that would destroy evidence. They destroyed the slave labour camps, and now they wanted to destroy the slave labour. And that was when Auschwitz was already liberated, because it was liberated in January. We refused to move up that hill. And of course, in hindsight, we now know that the Allies were on their heels. So dusk fell, and our Lagerführer, the one from the ammunition factory, suddenly appeared. And he stood in front of us as we were sitting on this embankment. He put his hand on his heart. And I'll tell you another story after this. His hand on his heart, and he said, I have been to you like a father. And we couldn't fathom out what he meant, like a father. We are going into captivity and you are free. With that, he took his hat off and put it on the embankment. And I always thought that I was imagining that. But when I met Barbara Lober in Hamburg in 2018, and I told her the story, she said, yes, he did. I said, I always thought I imagined it. She said, and we could also never work it out as to why whether he was being sarcastic, some more of this German sarcasm, or that he's been to us like a father. Anyway, and all our guards disappeared. Ironically, we heard bombing and explosions. The war was at its height because Himmler gave the order to destroy everything, and Churchill gave the order to the British forces to take as much of northern Germany as possible because he didn't want the Russians to get in, because they already got in a lot of, like half of Berlin and so on, and they didn't want. And we were thirsty and we were shocked, and 1 or 2 of the girls went down to those houses to ask for water for the girls that were so badly wounded. And nobody would open the door to us. So May the 2nd, the dew on the leaves and the grass was manna from heaven, really, for us. We fed ourselves on that. About 48 hours later, the British Medical Corps arrived, collected us, and put us into a big school and started treating the sick, the wounded, and our starvation. We weren't very happy because in hindsight, they did the right thing, because people that have been for many years on starvation the best thing is to feed them slowly, otherwise the system can't take it. And there they were with, from the 500 women, there were only about 320 left. The rest were all left on these trains where they were bombed and killed by the British, which they were terribly upset. And they were shocked as to the state of us. They found a village called Havkruk, which was on the Baltic Sea, and they ordered the people in that Havkruk village to vacate the homes within 24 hours and leave everything in them. The only people that were allowed to stay in Havkruk were the bakers, the butchers, the post office and the candles makers, people that could supply food. And it became a DP camp, displaced persons camp.
And if I just asked you, obviously it is 80 years since Auschwitz was liberated. As someone who spent time there, can you still see it all in detail now?
Yes, and ironically, I never spoke about it for 40 years. I couldn't speak about it. When I came from Prague, I was, for 3 years, when I was liberated, I didn't tell you where we went to Prague, and found another aunt of mine who was married 6 months before the war. They were separated from the husband for 6 years, and they found each other. And when this older aunt and the cousins took us to Prague, we'll go and find, because all the family lived in Prague and Karlsbad. We were the only ones that lived in Slovakia, because my father's business was there. But when I came to Birmingham, it was, nobody wanted to hear about it. That was number one, why I didn't speak. That's the reason I'm telling you this. Nobody would speak about it. And in 1948, Birmingham, England still had rationing. There was no street lighting here in Birmingham, and it was very badly bombed. It was a very depressive place. And people have lost sons and cousins and husbands. But Birmingham was particularly depressive because of the industries here, the car industry. They had a lot of bombing. And I found it very depressing. I came to an uncle's home, and this uncle, one story after another, you'll be full of stories, dear. He and his brother and a nephew ran away from Prague in 1939, where Hitler occupied Czechoslovakia. They went to Belgium, from Belgium to France, and joined the Czech British Legion. And they served in it for 6 years. They went to Dunkirk, all over the places on their first landing. But for some reason, he was back in this country, and he was stationed outside Leamington. And we were all very observant of our religion, and it was the Jewish New Year. And he asked his battalion, could he come in to celebrate the Jewish New Year? So they said, we'll find you a community, and they found Birmingham. So the people that had been through the camps, and they were closing the borders. By 1950, all the borders would be closed and people couldn't go anywhere, were leaving Prague in droves. It was difficult. England had already taken 10,000 Kindertransportees, that many immigrants from Germany. I mean, when my camp was written, for years, since 1933, the German people that realized what was in that book started emigrating to England. England, America, wherever they could go. So my aunt was looking as though she found her husband after 6 years. She took care of us because they all, my aunt formed a little family. They all formed their own little, and we were without parents. We lost our parents. Well, still, I was only 15 by then. My sister was 18. And I went to a school in Prague. And so to help my aunt, because really we didn't have anything. Okay, you were free. And people think, oh, you're free, you're ready to start a new life. It's not like that. Very often people had to emigrate to a different country, learn another language, and start living again without the support of family and so on, and the loved ones around them. It was very, very difficult.
What does it mean to be looking back 80 years on?
Looking back, I cannot believe that I've been through all of that.